Taking a Stand by Sitting Down, a special report on the 50th anniversary of the NCA&T sit-ins in Greensboro, North Carolina, by the Howard University News Service. 4 students practice Gandhi's nonviolence rules. On February 1st, 1960, the Greensboro Four, as they would later be called, felt isolated and alone as they sat at the whites-only lunch counter at the Woolworth store on South Elm Street. They were seeking more than what they ordered: sodas, coffee, donuts. They were attacking the social order of the time. The unwritten rules of society, known as the Jim Crow laws, required black people to stay out of white-owned restaurants, to use only designated drinking fountains and restrooms, to sit in the rear of the Greensboro city buses, in a separate balcony at the Center Theater, and in segregated bleachers during sports events at War Memorial Stadium. The 4 black youths, Franklin McCain, Joseph McNeil, Ezell Blair Jr., and David Richmond, all still teenagers and all freshmen on academic scholarships at NC&T State University, had entered the unknown. Franklin McCain concedes he can't remember everybody, of course, because by the 4th and 5th day of the sit-ins, the original 4 had grown to hundreds of demonstrators downtown. But many of the participants lacked the patience to sit for long periods of time, while spectators heckled and stared at them. What people won't talk about, what people don't like to remember, is that the success of that would give up soon, and the incident would blow over without harm to the store's robust sales. Harris disagreed. The sit-ins lasted off and on for 5 months before Woolworth and the Crest store down the street agreed to integrate. Segregation's pervasiveness was such that black people couldn't escape it. Joseph McNeil got off a bus at Union Station downtown in January 1960, returning from a visit to his home in Wilmington over the Christmas vacation. He was hungry. The station had a restaurant. He wasn't allowed to sit down and eat. His outrage accompanied him back to Scott Hall, where that night he and his roommate, Greensboro native David Richmond, gathered with McCain and another Greensboro native, Blair, both of whom bunked down the hall. Since entering school the previous autumn, they had held ongoing gripe sessions in their Scott Hall rooms about life in the South. I was getting tired of just talking about it, McCain says, and McNeil said he was too. Many times they had attacked previous generations of black people, including their own parents and university administrators, for what the 4 perceived as a weak response to segregation. McCain told his friends, by just talking and doing nothing, they were no better. Potential targets for protests were plentiful, from the city buses, where black people had to ride in the rear, to the county jail, where separate cells were reserved for black inmates. The 4 freshmen selected Woolworth. They especially resented the company's double standard. Everywhere but in the South, black and white patrons sat together at Woolworth counters. In Greensboro, not only was the counter segregated, but so was the staff behind it and in the kitchen upstairs. Waitresses were white. Those who fixed the food and cleaned up were black. Black patrons could shop Woolworth's general merchandise counters and eat at a stand-up snack bar and bakery counter. But one section of the store was forbidden territory: the long L-shaped lunch counter, with stainless steel and plastic cushioned stools that took up nearly 2 walls of the first floor. They say they barely slept the night before the sit-in started. Then they had a full day of classes on Monday. It was after 3 p.m. before Richmond, Blair, and McNeil made it to the designated spot outside Bluford Library, where they waited for McCain, who had a late Air Force ROTC class. They walked up East Market Street through the railroad underpass that still serves as the dividing point between the black and white communities of Greensboro. As the 4 turned onto South Elm Street at Jefferson Square, McCain had awful thoughts about what might happen to him in the store, whose familiar red sign was looming ahead. I can tell you this, he said. I was fully prepared mentally not to ever come back to the campus. I thought the worst thing that could happen to us is we could have had our heads split open with a nightstick and hauled into prison. At Woolworth, the 4 split up in pairs and went to various counters to buy toothpaste and school supplies. The strategy was to ask why they could be served in other parts of the store, but not at the lunch counter. McNeil and McCain were the first to take seats at the counter, where about 12 white people were taking afternoon coffee breaks. They had expected a ruckus. They encountered silence. It was as if they were invisible. Waitresses ignored them. Geneva Tisdale, a black employee who was working behind the counter, figured the four young men were confused out-of-towners who didn't know the ways of Greensboro. I just thought there was somebody here from someplace else that didn't know they didn't serve blacks, she said, so I kept on doing what I was doing. She changed her mind when the four finally got the attention of a waitress, who told them black people weren't served at the counter. When they refused to leave, a black employee, not Tisdale, gave the students a lecture on how they were troublemakers hurting race relations. Curly Harris was next to talk to the students. When the four men wouldn't budge from their seats, Harris hurried to the police station 2 blocks away to see Chief Paul Calhoun. The inflappable chief said that as long as the students behaved, he could do nothing. He did dispatch a police officer to keep an eye on the store. Then came a sign from heaven. McCain is convinced. An elderly white woman came up to them. She said, "Boys, I am just so proud of you. My only regret is that you didn't do this 10 or 15 years ago." McCain recalls, "Well, 10 or 15 years ago, my goodness, I was only 8 or 10 years old. But I got the message, and I can tell you that simple acknowledgement and pat on the shoulder meant more to me that day than anything else. I got so much pride and such a good positive feeling from that little old lady. I mean, she'll never know it, but that really made the day for us." Back from the police station, Harris announced the store was closing early. The 4 students filed out, unserved but not deterred. They told Harris they'd be back the next day. On the walk back to campus, McCain said he felt like he was floating. "I've never felt so good in my life," he said. "I truly felt as though I had my going to the mountaintop experience." Back on campus that night, they rounded up leaders of student groups and held a meeting in the basement of Dudley Building. The 4 sought pledges to help the next day. Instead, they had to explain themselves. No one believed what they had done. The 4 finally managed to convince the majority present that this was no joke. Many in the room pledged to join them the next day. All of 2 people showed up to join the original 4 at the store. They sat from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. They were not served. Several white people heckled them, but again, they left unharmed and without being arrested. Once the news hit the TV, radio, and the newspapers, A&T students embraced the movement. Each day after that, more and more joined the original 4. By that Saturday, students from A&T and Bennett joined from sympathetic white students from UNCG, Greensboro College, and Guilford College, occupied every seat at the counter. Curly Harris was outraged. He could see sales figures plummeting. Geneva Tisdale was scared. Some rough-looking white people had started coming to the store to heckle the protesters. She heard some were Ku Klux Klan members. She was expecting a baby and was fearful of what stress might do to her pregnancy. The lunch counter manager, Rachel Holt, sent Tisdale upstairs to the kitchen so she wouldn't be exposed to ugliness. Finally, with the counter virtually shut down because of the sit-ins, Tisdale's boss sent her home. In addition to occupying seats inside, students formed picket lines along South Elm and Sycamore Streets to discourage people from shopping at Woolworth and Crest. A white kid threw a stink bomb onto the line and then ran. McCain says he feels better about America today than he did in 1960. He says he loves his country so much that he wants to kiss the ground after he returns from business trips abroad. McNeil says he believes in the fundamental goodness of people, white and black. He fought for civil rights in the 1960s and then fought again as an Air Force officer during the Vietnam War later in the decade. "This is my country," he says. "I not only fought for it, I fought for the chance to make it right. No one's going to deny me the opportunity. I am going to be a full participant in every aspect of this community, as well as my kids."